Now let's be clear. This is not about saying Trump is literally a space wizard in a black robe. And it is not about pretending fiction and reality are identical. But if you look at the methods, the rhetoric, the political instincts, and the way power is built through fear, loyalty, spectacle, and division, the comparison becomes a lot harder to ignore. Because the real danger of Palpatine was never the lightning, it was the strategy. And that strategy may not be as fictional as we think. Palpatine is one of the greatest political villains ever written because he doesn't conquer democracy from the outside. He destroys it from within. He rises legally, he uses elections, he uses fear, he uses crisis, he uses public anger. And step by step, he turns a republic into an empire while convincing people that he is saving it. That's why this comparison matters. Because whether you love Trump, hate Trump, or are simply exhausted by politics, the reason people compare him to Palpatine has nothing to do with memes. It has to do with political behavior. So in this video, we're going to break down the biggest parallels between Palpatine and Trump, and why this comparison has become so powerful in the first place. 1. The Strongman Savior. The first major similarity is simple. Both build power around the idea that the system is broken and only they can save it. Palpatine rises during chaos. The Senate is weak. The Republic is gridlocked. People are frustrated, scared, and losing faith in their institutions. And Palpatine steps in with the perfect message. The government has failed you. The old system is corrupt. The enemies are growing stronger. Trust me. Give me more power. I'll restore order. That is the classic strongman formula. And it's one of the biggest reasons people compare him to Trump. Trump built much of his political identity the same way. As the outsider who alone could fix a corrupt system. He attacked the establishment, he attacked the media, he attacked the political class. He presented himself not just as a candidate, but as a solution. Not just a leader, but the leader. The one man tough enough, bold enough, and willing enough to do what others would not. That is Palpatine's language too. Not literally in words, but in structure. Both figures gain strength by convincing people that ordinary politics no longer works. And once people believe that, they become far more willing to accept extraordinary power. 2. Fear is the weapon. The second major parallel is fear. Palpatine understands one thing better than anyone. Fear is the fastest way to make people surrender freedom. In Star Wars, every major step of his rise is powered by fear. Fear of war, fear of separatists, fear of instability, fear of enemies inside and outside the Republic. And once fear takes hold, people stop asking whether power should be expanded and start asking who can protect them. That is how democracies begin to bend. Trump's politics has often relied on the same emotional engine: fear of national decline, fear of invasion, fear of crime, fear of internal enemies, fear that the country is being stolen, weakened, humiliated, or betrayed. Now, to be fair, fear is not unique to Trump. A lot of politicians use fear. But what makes the comparison stronger is the way fear becomes central to the brand. Not just a campaign tactic, but the atmosphere itself. A permanent sense of emergency. A permanent sense that the nation is under threat. A permanent sense that if the wrong people win, everything collapses. That emotional state is where strongman politics thrives, and Palpatine lives there. He does not calm fear. He manages it, he feeds it, he uses it. Because people who are afraid will tolerate things they would normally reject. 3. They turn enemies into a political engine. Another major similarity is the need for enemies. Palpatine always needs an enemy. The separatists, the Jedi, traitors, conspirators, hidden threats. The enemy is never just someone to defeat. The enemy is part of the machine that keeps him powerful. Because when people are angry at an enemy, they rally around the man who claims he can destroy it. Trump has used this dynamic constantly. His politics is deeply conflict-driven. He does not simply campaign on policy. He campaigns on opposition, against elites, against the press, against the deep state, against ideological opponents, against internal betrayal. Everything becomes a battlefield. Everything becomes us versus them. And that's what makes the comparison to Palpatine hit so hard. Because Palpatine doesn't just defeat opponents. He transforms politics into permanent warfare. Not always military warfare, but psychological warfare, narrative warfare, identity warfare. The goal is not compromise. The goal is loyalty. If politics becomes a war, then dissent starts looking like treason. And once dissent starts looking like treason, democracy gets very fragile, very fast. 4. They attack institutions while claiming to defend the nation. This is where the comparison becomes especially uncomfortable. Palpatine constantly presents himself as the defender of the Republic, but in reality, he is hollowing it out. He speaks the language of protection, while undermining the very institutions that limit his power. He doesn't say, "I'm here to end democracy." He says the opposite. He says he is preserving peace, preserving security, preserving civilization. That is what makes him dangerous. Trump's critics argue that he operates in a similar way. He presents himself as defending America, defending its people, its values, its strength, while also attacking or discrediting the institutions that restrain executive power. The courts, the media, elections, bureaucracies, investigations, established norms. Again, this is why the Palpatine comparison sticks. Because Palpatine's genius is not brute force alone. It is the ability to make power grabs look like patriotic necessity. He wraps domination in the language of national survival, and once that happens, resistance can be framed not as disagreement, but as sabotage. 5. Cult of personality. Palpatine is not just a politician. He becomes the center of political gravity itself. The system stops being about laws, process, or institutions. It becomes about him, his will, his image, his leadership, his ability to define reality. That is a huge part of authoritarian politics. The leader becomes bigger than the office. And that is one of the strongest parallels people draw with Trump. Trump inspires an unusually personal form of loyalty. For many supporters, he is not just a Republican politician. He is the movement itself. To attack him is to attack the movement. To doubt him is to betray the cause. To reject him is to side with the enemy. That is not normal party politics. That is personality-centered politics. And Star Wars shows exactly where that logic can lead, because once loyalty to the leader becomes more important than loyalty to the system is already in danger. 6. Testing the limits of the system. Here is another important point. Palpatine does not destroy the Republic in one moment. He tests it, he pushes, he expands, he watches what he can get away with. And every time the system bends, instead of stopping him, he goes further. That is how institutional erosion usually works, not in one giant explosion, but through normalization. Today's shocking move becomes tomorrow's routine headline. Today's exception becomes tomorrow's precedent. And that's why so many people use the Palpatine comparison in relation to Trump. Not necessarily because every single action is identical, but because the pattern feels familiar. Push the boundary, attack the guardrails, frame every limit as illegitimate, and turn every confrontation into proof that the leader is fighting the corrupt machine. That rhythm is pure Palpatine, because Palpatine wins not just because he is evil, but because the system fails to stop him while it still can. The big difference. Now, there is one important difference. Palpatine is a fictional mastermind designed to be almost perfect in his manipulation. Trump is a real person in a messy, real-world democracy. Reality is far more chaotic than fiction. Palpatine controls both sides of a galactic war. Trump does not have that level of absolute control. Palpatine is disciplined, patient, and almost always calculating several moves ahead. Trump is often impulsive, theatrical, and unpredictable. So no, they are not literally the same, and saying that too simplistically can weaken the argument. But that doesn't erase the reason the comparison exists, because the point is not that Trump is a one-to-one copy of Palpatine. The point is that people recognize the same authoritarian pattern: charisma mixed with grievance, fear mixed with power, loyalty mixed with spectacle, and a constant pressure against the limits of democratic institutions. That's the real comparison. Not robes, not lightning, not memes. The playbook. So, are Palpatine and Trump the same? Not literally. But that's not why the comparison matters. The reason it matters is because Palpatine represents a political warning. A leader who tells a frightened public exactly what they want to hear. A leader who turns enemies into fuel. A leader who presents power as protection. A leader who says he alone can restore greatness, while slowly teaching people to accept more and more control. That is why this comparison won't go away. Because Palpatine is not scary just because he is evil. He is scary because he is believable. He is the fantasy version of something very real. The collapse of democratic restraint under the pressure of fear, anger, and devotion to a single leader. And maybe that's the real lesson of Star Wars. Empires do not always arrive with marching armies. Sometimes they arrive to applause.